Clara Whitlow stood on the courthouse steps with blood on one sleeve, dust on her hem, and the deed clenched so tight her knuckles shone white. The auction bell had already rung for Caleb Hart's dying ranch, and half of Mercy Crossing had come to watch the Quiet Cowboy lose the last piece of his father. They saw only an abandoned nurse, left at the station with no trunk, no husband, and no name anyone wished to defend. Caleb saw the way she kept standing, though shame pressed against her like heat. When the rival rancher laughed and called her Charity dressed in calico, Clara opened her hand and changed every life on that street. Before the dust rises, write your country in the comments so I know where this story found you. If you enjoy lonely cowboys, brave women, and love that heals old wounds, subscribe for the next tale. The courthouse bell had a cracked sound, like iron struck underwater. It rang once over Mercy Crossing, and the people gathered tighter in the street. Men leaned against hitching posts. Women shaded their faces with gloved hands. Children stood on wagon wheels to see over shoulders. Dust hung low around every boot, stirred by restless horses and the hot breath of a dry September wind. Caleb Hart stood at the bottom of the courthouse steps with his hat in his hands. That was the painful thing Clara Whitlow noticed first. Not the auction paper nailed to the courthouse door, not the banker with his polished watch, not Silas Morrow, broad and smiling beside his black horse, ready to buy another man's ruin. No, it was Caleb Hart's hat. A quiet cowboy did not take off his hat in the street unless he was in church, at a grave, or standing before something that had already beaten him. His ranch was dying. Everyone in Mercy Crossing knew it. Hollow Bend had once carried 600 head of cattle through winter. Now its fences sagged. Its north pasture had gone yellow, its well was half mud, and its barn roof showed more sky than shingles. Caleb's father had died owing money after a fever took the hands, drought took the grass, and a fire took the supply shed. Caleb had worked until his knuckles cracked and his shoulders thinned, but work could not make water rise from dry ground. The banker cleared his throat by order of Note and Leon. The property known as Hollow Bend Ranch shall be sold this day to satisfy debts owed. A murmur passed through the town. Caleb did not speak. He only lowered his eyes. Clara stood at the edge of the crowd, one hand pressed to the torn seam of her sleeve. She had arrived in Mercy Crossing the night before on the eastbound train. Though she had meant to go west, she had been traveling with Dr. Ambrose Pritchard, a surgeon who had promised her wages, a position, and, in time, marriage if she proved grateful enough. At dawn, she woke on a bench in the depot with her valise gone, her pay stolen, and a note pinned under her glove. Do not follow. No respectable practice can afford the burden of a woman with your history. Her history was simple. She had nursed men through cholera in St. Louis, children through fever in Kansas, and one dying stranger through a long night beside a wrecked freight car. She had steady hands, a strong stomach, and a heart that remembered every face it could not save. But she had no family name that opened doors, no husband to speak for her, and no money left after the doctor took what little she had earned. By noon, the town already knew some version of it. Abandoned nurse. Too proud to beg. Probably trouble. She had gone to the courthouse to ask where she might find work, and instead had found a whole town gathered to watch Caleb Hart lose his home. Opening bid, the banker said. $1,000. Silas Morrow lifted two fingers. 1,000. It was too quick, too hungry. Caleb's jaw tightened. Clara had seen that kind of look in sick rooms. Men try not to cry when the doctor stepped out quiet. Women holding breaths beside a child's bed. The body knew before the mouth admitted it. Any other bid? The banker called. No one answered. Clara looked at the deed in her hand. It had been folded inside the lining of her medical satchel, hidden there by a dying man named Thomas Vale 3 months before. He had been dragged from a freight wreck with broken ribs and smoke in his lungs. Clara had kept him breathing until morning. Before he died, he pressed the packet into her palm and whispered, Heartland. Stolen wrong. No spring. Give it back if you ever find the boy. She had not understood then. She had carried the packet because it was the last wish of a dying man. She had meant to ask at stations along the way, but Dr. Pritchard mocked her for chasing ghost stories. After he abandoned her in Mercy Crossing, she opened the packet again beneath the depot lantern. There it was, a deed to 200 acres north of Hollow Bend, signed before a territorial judge 24 years ago. Land recorded to Daniel Hart, Caleb's father. Land later absorbed into Morrow Range after a boundary change no one seemed able to explain. And on that land, according to Thomas Val's shaking words, was a spring going once. The banker said. Clara stepped forward. A woman near the steps whispered, "That's her. The one left at the depot." Another said, "Mercy, look at her sleeve." Silas Morrow turned and smiled. He had a handsome face, but it did not soften when he smiled. "Ma'am, this is business." Clara's mouth had gone dry. Her knees trembled beneath her skirt, but she forced herself up one step. "So is this?" Caleb looked at her then. His eyes were gray, tired, and guarded as a winter sky. "You don't need to do this," he said quietly, as if he feared she was about to embarrass herself for his sake. The words stung, though they were not cruel. She heard what he meant. He did not want pity. He did not want a stranger stepping into a fight she could not survive. Silas chuckled. "Let her speak, Hart. Maybe she's brought bandages for your pride." A few men laughed. Clara's face burned. For one breath, shame almost dragged her backward. She saw herself as they saw her, a dusty woman in a torn dress, abandoned by the only person who had promised protection, clutching paper like a child, clutching a rag doll. Then Caleb moved. He did not thunder. He did not threaten. He simply stepped beside her, not in front of her, and said, "Let the lady finish." The street quieted. Clara unfolded the deed. "This land was recorded to Daniel Hart," she said, her voice shaking at first, then strengthening. 200 acres north of Hollow Bend, including the old Cottonwood Basin and the spring branch beneath the ridge. It was never legally transferred. If this deed is valid, Hollow Bend is not landlocked, not waterless, and not worth what Mr. Morrow hopes to pay for it. Silas' smile disappeared. The banker reached for the paper. "Where did you get this?" "From a dying man who said it had been stolen wrong. Name, Thomas Vale." At that name, Silas Morrow's hand tightened on his reins. Caleb saw it. Clara saw Caleb see it. The banker skimmed the deed. The town leaned in like one living creature. "This requires examination," the banker said. "The auction cannot proceed while title is contested," Clara replied. The words surprised even her. She had learned them from patients who muttered about claims in courts in fever dreams, from old men who hated lawyers, from widows who lost farm because no one told them which paper mattered. Silas took one step up. "You expect us to believe an abandoned nurse came wandering into town with salvation in her pocket?" Clara met his eyes. "No, I expect you to read the deed." The street went still. Caleb looked at the paper, then at Clara. Shock moved through his face, but beneath it was something quieter. Not hope. He had been hurt too much for hope to come easily. It was recognition, as if, in front of everyone who saw only shame, he had seen a woman standing with nothing left but truth, and choosing to spend it on him. The auction was postponed until the county recorder could inspect the deed, and Mercy Crossing did not forgive Clara for making the day interesting in a way no one had expected. By late afternoon, half the town had decided she was a thief. The other half decided she was a schemer. Only a few wondered whether she might be exactly what she seemed, a tired nurse with dust in her throat and nowhere safe to sleep. Caleb found her behind the livery stable, washing blood from her sleeve with water from a horse trough. He stood several paces away so his shadow would not fall over her. You're hurt? Clara wrung the cloth. Pink water dripped into the dust. Not mine. His brows drew together. A boy fell under a freight cart this morning, she said. I bound his arm before I went to the courthouse. His mother did not have money, so the station master told me I was interfering. Caleb's expression changed, only slightly, but she was trained to notice small changes, breath easing, jaw loosening, eyes focusing on the person instead of the problem. That was Mrs. Bell's youngest, he said. She lost her husband last winter. He'll keep the arm if the wound stays clean. Caleb nodded. I'll tell her. Clara looked at him. You believe me? I believe a woman who knows how to stop bleeding usually knows when blood isn't hers. It was not a compliment, not exactly. It was something sturdier. He shifted his hat from one hand to the other. Mrs. Bell runs the wash house. She has no spare room. The hotel won't take you without payment. The church might, but Mrs. Gable will ask questions from supper until sunrise. Clara almost smiled. You know where I cannot go. I know this town. And where do you suggest I can go? The answer cost him. She saw it before he spoke. My ranch has a bunk room. Roof leaks in 2 corners. Stove smokes if the wind comes east. It isn't charity. I have a foreman with lung fever and a milk cow with a torn flank. If you tend them, you can sleep there until the deed matter is settled. It was practical, restrained, almost cold. Yet Clara heard the care hidden inside the rough edges. He was giving her shelter without naming it shelter, work without questioning whether she could do it, and a way to accept without bowing her head. Still, pride rose in her, shot and tired. You think bringing the abandoned woman to your ranch will help your reputation? My reputation is already nailed to that auction notice. That is not an answer. He looked toward the street, where Silas Morrow mounted his black horse and watched them from a distance. No, it won't help. It might make things worse. Then why offer? Caleb's voice lowered. Because you stood beside me when no one else would. She wanted to trust that. She wanted it so badly that it frightened her. Dr. Pritchard had offered safety too. He had spoken gently in train cars and hotel dining rooms. He had praised her skill when it served him and shamed her independence when it did not. She had mistaken usefulness for belonging. She would not do that again. I will work for my board, she said. Nothing more. Caleb nodded. Nothing more. The ride to Hollow Bend took them through country that looked as exhausted as Caleb. The prairie rolled brown and brittle under a lowering sky. Wind worried at the grass. A distant train whistle cried behind them, long and lonely. And Clara felt the sound like a door closing on the life she had thought she was traveling toward. Caleb rode ahead on a bay gelding, leading a spare horse for her. He did not feel the silence. At first she thought it was indifference. Then she noticed he slowed at rough patches, chose the gentler slope, and turned once when a coyote barked from the ridge. The ranch appeared near sunset. Hollow Bend sat in a shallow valley, its main house built of weathered wood, with a stone chimney and a porch that sagged at one end. The barn leaned but still stood. Cottonwoods marked a dry creek bed beyond the corral. A windmill turned lazily, complaining with every circle. It was not grand. It was not hopeless either. Clara saw stacked firewood under canvas, mended harness on pegs, a small kitchen garden shielded with scrap fencing, and clean water barrels under the eaves. Poverty lived there, but neglect did not. A man coughed from the bunkhouse as they rode in. That's Amos, Caleb said. He'll claim he's fine. Men usually do when they are not. Caleb almost smiled, then seemed to remember he had no practice at it. Inside the bunkhouse, Amos Pike lay under 2 quilts, his face gray and damp. He was older than Caleb by 20 years, with a beard gone silver and hands scarred from rope. One look told Clara the fever had settled deep. She set down her satchel. How long? Amos wheezed. Since yesterday. 3 days, Caleb said. Amos glared at him. Clara rolled up her sleeves. I need boiled water, clean cloth, mustard if you have it, onions, salt, and a pan. Caleb hesitated, as if unused to being ordered in his own place. Then he went. That was his first act of help, and it was imperfect in the way of a man who had lived too long without needing to explain himself. He brought the wrong pan, forgot the salt, and returned with cloth too rough for a sick man's chest. When Clara corrected him, he stiffened. When she asked for more light, he set the lantern too close and smoked the room. Amos muttered that the two of them were going to kill him faster than the fever. But Caleb kept trying. He chopped kindling in the dark. He held Amos upright while Clara spooned broth between cracked lips. He rode to the far shed for dried mustard, though rain began to spit from the clouds. He did not hover, but he did not leave. Near midnight, Clara stepped outside to breathe. The ranch lay under a thin rain that smelled of dust and wood smoke. In the house window, a lamp burned low. Caleb stood by the corral fence, hat pulled down, shoulders dark with wet. You should sleep, she said. So should you. I am accustomed to sick rooms. I am accustomed to losing things. The words came plain, with no self-pity. That made them hurt more. Clara stood beside him, leaving a careful space between them. Your father's land might be returned. Paper doesn't bring back years. No, she said, but sometimes it keeps thieves from taking the years that remain. He turned his head. Rain clung to his lashes. You talk like you fought them before. I have fought fever, hunger, infection, men with titles, and women who thought cruelty was the same as virtue. And did you win? Clara looked at the dark outline of the dying ranch. Some days, Caleb nodded slowly, as if that was the most honest answer he had heard in a long time. By the third day at Hollow Bend, Clara learned the ranch sounds. The windmill screamed before dawn. The kitchen stove clicked when the fire caught. The barn cat scratched at the back door exactly when biscuits came out. Caleb's boots crossed the porch before sunrise and again long after dark. Amos coughed less each morning, though he pretended not to notice. A loose shutter tapped whenever the prairie wind came hard from the north. Clara began tapping back in her mind, a small rhythm, a way of telling herself she was still there. She earned her place with work. She cleaned Amos' bedding and burned the worst of the rags. She lanced the milk cow's swollen wound, while Caleb held the animal steady and murmured to it in a voice so low, Clara could not make out the words. She sorted the medicine bottles left by Caleb's mother, finding laudanum gone cloudy, dried chamomile, a little carbolic, and enough bandaged linen to make her heart lift. In the kitchen, she found flour, beans, coffee, salt pork, and a jar of peaches put up 2 summers ago. The shelves were not empty, but they were careful. Every scoop mattered. Every meal had been measured against winter. Caleb noticed the way she counted. You don't need to stretch it that thin, he said one morning as she rolled biscuit dough. Yes, I do. He leaned in the doorway, hair still damp from the pump. You think I don't feed people who work for me? I think a ranch underdad feeds people carefully. He said nothing. She cut the biscuits smaller. After a while, he crossed to the pantry and took down a sack of cornmeal. My mother used to say a small biscuit makes a man feel poor. A good Johnny cake makes him feel prepared. Clara glanced up. Are you suggesting I cook more or differently? I'm suggesting I know how to stir cornmeal without ruining it. That was how trust began at Hollow Bend. Not with speeches, but with Caleb Hart standing at the stove beside her, stirring cornmeal in a black pot while Clara tried not to notice the strength in his forearms or the awkward care he took not to crowd her. They ate with Amos at the kitchen table, because Clara refused to let a recovering man take meals alone in the bunkhouse. Caleb objected once, saying Amos preferred quiet. Amos objected louder, saying he preferred not being fussed over. Clara set down 3 plates and ignored them both. By the end of the meal, Amos had eaten twice what he claimed he could. Outside, the ranch still suffered. Cattle bawled along the fence line. The south trough ran low by noon. Caleb and his young hand, Eli, hauled water in barrels from a muddy draw 2 miles away. Every trip cost time. Every hour of delay thinned the herd. The deed remained in town with the recorder, and Silas Morrow began spreading stories before the ink of the postponement dried. He told the church ladies Clara had stolen the deed from a dead man. He told the banker Caleb had hired her to forge papers. He told the men at the saloon that a nurse traveling alone was no better than trouble with a medicine bag. Clara heard these things when she went to town for supplies on Friday. Caleb had not wanted her to go alone. She had insisted. He rode with her anyway, but he stayed across the street at the blacksmith so she could enter the general store by herself. She understood what he was doing. He was letting her stand, yet remaining near enough that no one could pretend she had been abandoned twice. Inside the store, Mr. Voss weighed coffee with a pinched mouth. His wife watched Clara's gloves, her hem, her face. "Cash only," Mr. Voss said. "I have $2. Prices changed. The sign says coffee is 12 cents. For regular customers." Clara felt the old heat of humiliation rise up her neck. Thin flour also changed. A woman near the ribbon shelf whispered, "Maybe she can pay with another dead man's paper." Clara's fingers tightened around her purse. The door opened. Caleb entered, bringing sun and dust with him. He took in Clara's face, the storekeeper's smirk, the whispering women. He did not raise his voice. "Put the coffee, flour, sugar, and lamp oil on my account." Mr. Voss looked pleased. "Your account is closed, Hart." Caleb's jaw flexed. Clara set her purse on the counter. "Then weigh $2 worth of flour. Won't last long," Mr. Voss said. "No," she replied, "but neither will your sign if you keep lying beneath it." The store went silent. Caleb looked at her, startled. Mr. Voss flushed. "I beg your pardon." Clara pointed to the price board. "If coffee is 12 cents and flour is 6, you will sell them at that price, or explain to the county why posted prices change according to gossip." Mrs. Voss made a small choking sound. From the doorway, the blacksmith laughed once into his sleeve. Mr. Voss weighed the flour. When they stepped outside, Caleb took the sack before Clara could protest. "You made an enemy. I had one when I walked in. You made a louder one. Sometimes that is the only kind worth having." He studied her as if she were a puzzle with light coming through the cracks. "Most people would have let me speak. Most people expect men to save them from insults. And you don't." Clara looked down the street toward the church steeple, where bells began to ring for Friday prayer. "I need help, Mr. Hart. I am not ashamed of that, but I will hand over my dignity as payment." Something in his face softened. "Caleb," she blinked. "My name," he said. "If you're going to scold merchants on my behalf and keep my foreman alive, you might as well use it. Then you might call me Clara." "I already did in my head." The words slipped out before he could stop them. Color rose under his tan. Clara looked away, not to spare him entirely, but to spare herself. At church on Sunday, Mrs. Gable preached without being the preacher. She stood after service in a gray dress buttoned to her throat and asked Clara, in front of 6 women, whether it was wise for an unmarried woman to reside at a ranch with unmarried men. Clara felt every eye turn. Before she could answer, Caleb stepped from the church steps. He wore his black coat, brushed but frayed at the cuffs. His hair was combed. He looked uncomfortable in a way that made him seem younger. "Mrs. Gable," he said, "Miss Whitlow is employed at Hollow Bend as a nurse. Amos Pike would be dead without her. A woman's reputation is delicate. So is a man's life." The women shifted. Clara expected him to say more, to defend her fully, perhaps too fully, but he stopped there. At first, the restraint stung. Then she understood. He had not claimed her. He had not spoken as though her honor belonged to him. He had only stated the truth and left room for her to stand in it. Clara lifted her chin. I will continue my work. Anyone troubled by that may come scrub sickroom floors and sit through fever nights in my place. No one offered. On the ride home, prairie wind pushed against them. Caleb looked over once. You did not need me, no, she said. But I noticed you came that evening. They ate johnny cake with beans while rain threatened but did not fall. Caleb showed her his mother's herb garden, now mostly rosemary and stubborn mint. Clara told him how her own mother had died when Clara was 12, and how nursing had first been necessity before it became calling. He listened without interrupting. Not many men knew how to listen without preparing a judgment. When the lantern burned low, Caleb walked her to the porch instead of the bunk room. The moon was thin over the barn roof. Somewhere in the dark, a calf called for its mother. The recorder sends word tomorrow, he said. Clara nodded. If the deed is false, it is not. But if the court says otherwise, he continued, you still have a place here until you choose where to go. She looked at him sharply. Because I am useful. His answer came slowly. Because this house has been less empty since you came. Clara did not know what to do with tenderness spoken so plainly. She stepped inside before her heart could answer faster than her caution. The recorder's answer came with storm clouds. The deed was real, but there was a problem. The northern tract had indeed been recorded to Daniel Hart, and no proper sale had ever been filed. Yet Silas Morrow held a later claim, signed by a territorial clerk who had been dead for 15 years. The recorder could not settle the matter alone. A circuit judge would arrive in 1 week. Until then, the land remained contested. 1 week was enough time for a desperate man to do harm. Silas Morrow began with rumors. Then he sent riders along Caleb's fence at night. Twice, cattle broke through cut wire and wandered toward Morrow Range. Once Eli found a dead calf near the dry creek with no mark of wolf or cat. Caleb buried it himself, face hard as stone. Clara watched him change. He slept less, spoke less, rode the north line until dark. When he came in, dust covered him from hat to spur, and grief sat on him like another coat. On the 4th night, Clara found him in the barn, standing before an old saddle hung on the wall. A boy's saddle, cracked with age. She should have turned away. Instead, a floorboard creaked. Caleb looked over, and for once he did not hide quickly enough. Pain was open in his face. I came for more bandaged linen, Clara said. He nodded, but did not move. The barn smelled of hay, leather, and approaching rain. Lantern light trembled over the beams. Clara stepped inside slowly. Was it yours? She asked. My brother's. She waited. Samuel. Caleb touched the saddle horn. He was 9. I was 14. Father sent us to check the North Spring after a storm. We found Morrow men there, though back then Silas' father ran the place. They said we were trespassing. Samuel got scared and rode too hard down the wash. Horse slipped. Clara's throat tightened. He lived 2 days, Caleb said. Fever took him after the break. My mother stopped singing. Father spent the rest of his life trying to prove the land was ours. Papers disappeared. Witnesses left. Money went to lawyers. Then drought came. Then sickness. Then fire. The burnt homestead. Clara said softly. Caleb looked at her. I saw the black stones beyond the ridge. Our first house, burned the year after Samuel died. Folks said lightning. His mouth tightened. Father said it was warning. Clara remembered Thomas Vale's dying whisper. Stolen wrong. So Miss Vale knew, she said. That is why he carried the deed. Caleb nodded slowly. Vale worked for Morrow's father as a clerk. My father trusted him once. Then he vanished. He died, trying to return what he should have given sooner. Too late for Samuel. There was no comfort clean enough for that wound. Clara knew the cruelty of late truth. She had watched apologies arrive after burials, letters after departures, medicine after breath had stopped. So she did not offer easy mercy. No, she said. Too late for Samuel. Not too late for you. His eyes closed briefly. Thunder rolled far off. Before either of them could speak again, hoofbeats sounded in the yard. Caleb reached for the rifle near the stall door. Clara lifted the lantern. A rider came through the rain, bent low in the saddle. For one wild second, Clara thought it might be a Morrow man. Then the rider slid down, and her stomach dropped. Dr. Ambrose Pritchard stood in the mud of Hollow Bend Yard, wearing the same dark traveling coat he had worn when he left her sleeping at the depot. He smiled as if arriving for supper. "Clara," he called. "You have led me on quite a chase." Caleb stepped onto the barn threshold. "Who are you?" Pritchard's gaze moved over him, measuring his worn shirt, muddy boots, and rifle. "A physician, and the man responsible for Miss Whitlow." Clara felt cold. "You are responsible for nothing of mine," she said. Pritchard sighed. "Still angry. Understandable. But you took property from my medical satchel." "My satchel? Documents entrusted to my care." Caleb's voice was flat. "The deed." Pritchard's smile thin. "A disputed paper of some value. Miss Whitlow is emotional. She becomes attached to patients, imagines promises, builds grand moral crusades. It is one reason I hesitated to keep her in my practice." The words were knives wrapped in velvet. Clara had heard them before. Emotional, difficult, grateful one day, proud the next. Too much feeling to be trusted with serious work. Caleb looked at Clara, not Pritchard. "Did you steal it?" "No." "Did Ben do?" "Yeah." "A misunderstanding." She was overwrought. Caleb raised the rifle slightly, not aiming, but enough. "You should leave." "I will, once Miss Whitlow returns the deed and herself to proper care." The rain grew heavier. Clara stood very still. Proper care. A cage could be called care by the person holding the key. "I am not going with you," she said. Pritchard's eyes hardened. "You have no money, no position, and no reputation left in this territory. Do not mistake a failing rancher's gratitude for a future." The shot landed where he intended. Clara felt it deep, not because she believed Caleb's kindness false, but because she feared needing it too much. Caleb took one step forward. Clara touched his arm. It stopped him. The contact startled them both. She stepped past him into the rain. "Dr. Pritchard, you left me without wages, trunk, or ticket. You took my references and my savings. You might tell yourself whatever story helps you sleep, but I know what you did. You know it too." His face changed. For the first time, the polished doctor looked ugly. "You ungrateful little..." Caleb moved then, fast and quiet, placing himself beside Clara again. "Not before. Beside. Finish that," he said, "and you'll answer for it." Pritchard looked between them. Rain ran off his hat brim. "Morrow will hear of this, so will the judge." "Good," Clara said. "Tell them I am ready to speak." The doctor mounted and rode out, leaving churned mud behind. When he was gone, Clara realized she was shaking. Caleb lowered the rifle. "You should have told me that I was foolish, that you were robbed," as she wrapped her arms around herself. "I was both." "No." His voice was rougher than she had ever heard it. "Trusting a man who lies does not make you foolish. It makes him a liar." That sentence broke something open in her. She turned away quickly, but not before he saw the tears. He did not touch her. He only stood in the rain and kept watch while she gathered herself, as if her grief were not a spectacle, not a weakness, but weather that deserved shelter. The winter storm came early. It swept down from the north on the morning the circuit judge arrived, turning the sky iron and the prairie white at the edges. By noon, sleet struck the windows of the courthouse. By 1, horses stood shivering beneath blankets along the rail. By 2, Nearly every soul in Mercy Crossing had crowded inside to hear the matter of Hart versus Morrow. Clara sat at the front with the deed folded in her lap. Caleb sat beside her, silent as fence wire. Silas Morrow had brought 2 lawyers, 3 writers, and Dr. Pritchard, who wore respectability like a clean collar. Mrs. Gable sat behind them, with her lips pressed thin. Mr. Voss whispered to the banker. The bellboy, arm in a sling, squeezed beside his mother near the stove and gave Clara a shy nod. That nod steadied her more than any legal promise could have. The judge was an old man with tired eyes and no patience for theater. He reviewed the deed. He reviewed Morrow's claim. He asked for witnesses. Silas stood first. He spoke of investment, fences, taxes, and the importance of stable ownership. He said Caleb Hart had let Hollow Bend decay. He said old grief had confused the Hart family for years. He said Clara Whitlow appeared under suspicious circumstances with a document no one had seen in 2 decades. Then Pritchard stood. Clara's hands went cold. He testified that Clara was skilled but unstable, that she had formed unhealthy attachments to dying patients, that she had stolen papers from his belongings after he chose to end their professional association. He expressed sorrow while sharpening every word. Caleb's fist curled on his knee. Clara placed her hand over the deed, not over Caleb's fist, though she wanted to. This was her fight, too. The judge looked at her. Miss Whitlow, do you wish to answer? Clara stood. The room seemed to tilt. She saw faces blur together. Curious, doubtful, hungry, sympathetic, cruel. She remembered the depot bench, the missing trunk, the note beneath her glove. She remembered every sick room where men with titles took credit for women's labor. She remembered Thomas Vale gasping through smoke, begging her to carry truth farther than he had carried courage. I do, she said. Her voice shook on the first word and steadied on the second. I was employed by Dr. Pritchard as a nurse. He did not own my satchel. He did not own the deed. The deed was given to me by Thomas Vale before his death after a freight accident outside Abilene. Mr. Vale said he had helped conceal land that belonged to Daniel Hart. He asked me to return it if I found the Hart family. Pritchard scoffed. Convenient. Clara turned to him. You read the packet. You told me no dying man's guilt was worth offending rich men. Then you stole my wages and left me in Mercy Crossing because I would not burn it. The room stirred. Pritchard's face reddened. Lies. Mrs. Bell stood suddenly. She saved my boy's arm with no payment. The judge frowned. Sit, madam. Mrs. Bell sat, but the room had changed. Amos rose next, leaning on a cane. She saved my life too. Caleb looked sharply at him. You should be in bed. Amos grunted. And miss this. I ain't dead yet. A ripple of quiet laughter moved through the room. Not cruel this time, but human. Then the banker spoke, surprising everyone. Your Honor, I examined the debt records. If the North Spring tract is restored to Hollow Bend, the assessed value of the ranch changes significantly. So does its capacity to operate. Foreclosure under prior valuation might be improper. Silas' chair scraped. You spineless weasel. The judge struck his gavel. Mr. Morrow outside. The storm slammed sleet against the courthouse windows. The judge lifted Morrow's claim. This later filing bears the signature of Clerk Ansel Reed. I have seen Reed's hand. This is not it. Silas went still. The room breathed in. The judge continued. Further, tax payments on the disputed land were made through a shell company linked to Morrow Cattle. I will order a full inquiry. For now, the original deed stands pending final confirmation. The North Tract and Spring assets returned to the Hart claim for one heartbeat. There was no sound. Then Caleb bowed his head. Clara saw his shoulders tremble once. Not weakness, release. Silas exploded. That land is mine. The judge's voice hardened. Not today. Silas turned on Clara. You think you bought yourself a place, nurse? Pa doesn't need a wife with a ruined name. He needs water. The insult cracked through the room. Clara felt every stare return to her. This was the public choice. She knew it before anyone moved. Caleb could stay silent and still keep his land. He could let the insult pass as men often did when a woman's pain complicated their victory. Instead, Caleb stood. He did not shout. His quiet carried farther. Miss Whitlow did not buy a place at Hollow Bend, he said. She earned one before any deed was read. She tended my people, challenged cheese, faced the heirs, and brought truth into a town that preferred gossip. You will not speak shame over her because she had courage you never found. Silas sneered. Careful, heart. Gratitude sounds close to love when a man is desperate. Caleb looked at Clara then, not as a rescuer, not as a man claiming what he had defended, as someone asking without words whether he might speak what would affect them both. Clara's heart pounded. She gave the smallest nod. Caleb turned back to the room. Then let it. I love her, but that is not why she is honorable. She was honorable when she stood alone. The room fell silent in a new way. Clara could barely breathe. Silas reached for his coat, perhaps for a pistol, perhaps only in rage. Caleb moved first, catching his wrist. The sheriff stepped in. Men shouted. A chair fell. The bellboy began to cry. Sleet hammered the glass. In the struggle, the stovepipe shook loose, spilling smoke and sparks near the dry curtains. Clara smelled danger before others saw it. Water, she cried. The curtain caught. Panic broke the room. Caleb released Silas to help pull people back. Clara grabbed the courthouse water bucket, threw it at the flames, then seized a wool coat from the bench and smothered the rest. Smoke filled her throat. Someone opened the door and wind knifed in, carrying Sleet across the floor. When it was over, the curtain hung black and dripping. The judge coughed into a handkerchief. This hearing is adjourned, Sheriff. Hold Mr. Morrow pending inquiry. Silas was dragged out cursing. Pritchard tried to slip through the side door. Mrs. Bell blocked him with surprising force until the sheriff's deputy took him too. After the banker admitted Pritchard had attempted to sell him the deed 2 days earlier, Clara stood amid smoke, soaked wool, and scattered papers. Her lungs burned. Her hands shook. Caleb came to her, fear naked in his face. Clara, I am all right. You ran toward fire. So did you. That is different. Only if my life is worth less. Pain crossed his face. Do you think I believe that? No, she whispered. But I needed to say it. He understood. She saw that he did. In front of the whole town, Caleb removed his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. Not to hide her, to warm her. Outside, the storm thickened. The road to Hollow Bend would be dangerous by dusk. The judge ordered everyone to stay in town until morning. But Caleb looked toward the north window, where the prairie vanished behind white wind. The cattle, Clara said. He nodded. If the fence is down near the spring track, they'll drift into the wash and freeze. Amos swore softly. Clara tightened Caleb's coat around her. Then we go. Caleb shook his head. Not you. She looked at him, steady despite smoke and storm. You said I had a place. Do not make it a small one. He stared at her for a long breath. Then he nodded. Together they rode into the storm. The world beyond town was white noise and iron cold. Wind shoved the horses sideways. Sleet stung Clara's cheeks until they went numb. Caleb rode close enough to block the worst gusts when he could, but not so close that he endangered her horse. Twice he called for her to turn back. Twice she refused. At the north line, they found the fence cut and cattle drifting toward the ravine. The newly returned spring track lay beyond, marked by cottonwoods bent under ice. Caleb and Eli drove the herd from the wash while Clara carried lanterns to mark the safe path. Her fingers ached around the handle. Her skirts froze at the hem. Once her horse stumbled, and Caleb caught the bridle before both went down. You're done, he shouted over the wind. No, she shouted back. There are 3 calves below the ridge. He looked, saw them, and for a moment fury and fear warred in his face. Then they went together. They brought the calves up one by one, Caleb lifting, Clara pushing, Eli guiding with rope. When the last calf reached level ground, Clara slipped on ice and struck her knee hard. Caleb dropped beside her. Can you ride? She gritted her teeth. I can. He looked like he wanted to carry her, order her, wrap the whole storm in his bare hands and tear it apart. Instead, he said, lean on me until you can stand. Rescue without pity. She took his arm. By the time they reached Hollow Bend, lanterns glowed in every window. Amos had fired the stove high. Mrs. Bell, who had somehow arrived with the supply wagon before the worst of the storm, had soup waiting. Even Mrs. Gable was there, stiff-backed, kneading bread, with the expression of a woman doing penance through flour. The ranch was not saved by one deed alone that night. It was saved by hands, by Caleb's courage, by Clara's stubborn light, by neighbors who had been shamed into decency and then warmed by the work of it. Snow lay over Hollow Bend the next morning, like a clean sheet drawn across an old wound. The storm had passed before dawn. Sunlight touched the cottonwoods on the north track and turned every ice branch silver. Beyond the ridge, the spring ran clear from stone, quick and bright, as if it had been waiting years for someone to speak its name again. Caleb brought Clara there after breakfast. Her knee was wrapped. His hands were bruised. Both of them moved slowly, but neither complained. The cattle grazed along the basin where winter grass still held green near the water. It was not enough to make a rich ranch overnight. It was enough to make survival honest. Caleb stood beside the spring with his hat in his hands again. This time it did not look like surrender. My father knew, he said. Yes, I hated him sometimes for chasing papers while the ranch fell apart. I thought he loved land more than the living. Clara watched water slip over stones. Grief can make a man look away from what he is truly trying to save. He was trying to bring Samuel home. In the only way left to him. Caleb's breath shook. Clara slipped her hand into his. This time, she touched him first. He looked down at their joined hands as if he had been handed something breakable and holy. I meant what I said in court, he told her. I know I don't expect anything returned. She smiled faintly. You make love sound like borrowed tack. I don't know how to make it sound pretty. Good. Pretty things are often poorly built. That almost brought his smile again. He turned toward her fully. I love you, Clara Whitlow. Not because you saved my ranch, though you did. Not because you saved Amos, the cows, and likely my foolish hide. I love you because when the world calls you unwanted, you keep choosing what is right. I love the way you stand. I love the way you refuse to be made small. And I would be honored if you stayed at Hollow Bend, in whatever way lets you remain yourself. Tears blurred the spring. No one had ever offered her a future without trying to own her gratitude. Clara looked toward the ranch house. Smoke rose from the chimney. Mrs. Bell's wagon stood near the barn. Eli chased a chicken from the porch. Amos sat in the sun, pretending he had permission to be outside. The house looked worn and poor and alive. I love you too, she said. But I need something understood. Anything. I will nurse. In town, on ranches, at stations, wherever I am needed. I will not hide in your kitchen, because Mercy Crossing has opinions. Caleb nodded. I figured the kitchen couldn't hold you, and if I stay, it is not because I have nowhere else. His eyes softened. No, it is because I choose to. He lifted her hand and pressed his lips to her knuckles. Then choose slowly. I'll be here. The apology came that afternoon. Not from everyone. Life was rarely that tidy. Mr. Voss sent supplies with a note claiming confusion over prices, which Clara read aloud in such a dry voice Amos nearly choked laughing. The banker came personally to restructure, Caleb's debt against the restored value of the ranch, his manner humble enough to be useful. The sheriff confirmed Silas Morrow would face charges for fraud, fence cutting, and threats. Though justice on the frontier moved like a tired wagon, Mrs. Gable arrived near sunset carrying a covered dish. Clara met her on the porch. For once, the older woman did not begin with judgment. She looked at Clara's bandaged hand, then toward the bunkhouse where Amos slept, then toward the spring ridge shining in the distance. "I was unkind," Mrs. Gable said. Clara waited. "I mistook loneliness for impropriety and courage for pride. I have done that before." The words seemed to pain her, which made them more real. "I am sorry." Clara accepted the dish. "Fish, Mare." Mrs. Gable looked startled, perhaps expecting punishment. Clara had no wish to become hard in the shape of those who hurt her. "Mercy Crossing needs a nurse," Mrs. Gable added. "The church has a back room. It could be cleaned. For patients, I mean. Respectably." Clara's mouth curved. "Respectably." Mrs. Gable flushed warmly. "That is better." By spring, the back room of the church became a small clinic with whitewashed walls, 2 narrow beds, shelves for bandages, and a stove that smoked only when the wind was cruel. Clara worked there 3 days a week, and at Hollow Bend the rest. Payment came in coins, eggs, mended gloves, firewood, and one, from the bellboy, a carved wooden horse with one ear too large. She kept it on the clinic shelf. Hollow Bend changed slowly. The North Spring filled troughs. Caleb repaired the barn roof with help from men who once crossed the street rather than discuss his debt. Eli grew taller. Amos recovered enough to complain full-time. The kitchen shelves filled by inches, then jars, then rows. Clara planted lavender beside Caleb's mother's rosemary, and the scent rose warm on summer evenings. Silas Morrow's empire did not vanish in a day, but it cracked. Men who had feared him began speaking. Old claims were reviewed. Families who had lost creek access found courage in Caleb's case. Thomas Vale's name was spoken with sorrow and anger both, as it should have been. A wrong confessed late did not become right, but it could still become a door. Dr. Pritchard left the territory under escort after evidence of theft and fraud followed him farther than his charm could outrun. Clara heard later that his fine practice back east had no use for scandal. She felt no triumph, only relief, clean and quiet. On the first Sunday of June, church bells rang over Mercy Crossing, bright and steady. Clara stood in a cream dress Mrs. Bell had altered by lamplight. There were no pearls, no satin train, no grand display. Wildflowers filled 2 jars at the front of the church. Amos stood beside Caleb as witness, wiping his eyes and blaming dust. Though the floor had just been swept, Caleb waited near the preacher in a dark coat, mended so carefully the old phrase looked like history instead of poverty. When Clara stepped inside, the town rose. Not everyone had earned the right to smile at her, but many tried. She saw Mrs. Gable dabbing her eyes. She saw the bellboy waving with his good arm. She saw Mr. Voss looking uncomfortable in a clean collar, which suited him. Caleb saw only her. As she walked toward him, Clara remembered the deep oak bench, the torn sleeve, the courthouse step, the deed trembling in her hand. She remembered thinking she had nothing left. She had been wrong. She had carried skill, truth, courage, a dying man's last chance, her own stubborn heart. At the altar, Caleb took her hands. The preacher spoke of vows, but Clara heard more than words. She heard the wind moving over the prairie, the creak of the windmill, the murmur of the spring, a far train whistle carrying other lost souls toward towns, where they might be seen truly or not at all. When it was time, Caleb's voice was low and sure. "I choose you, Clara, not as a debt repaid, not as charity received, as my family, my equal, and my home." Clara's eyes filled. "I choose you, Caleb, not because you saved me from shame, but because you stood beside me until I remembered shame was not my name. I choose this ranch, this town when it is kind, this work, this life, and the courage we will need to keep choosing each other. Outside, after the vows, the town gathered beneath a blue sky, washed clean by morning rain. There was food on long tables, beans, bread, fried chicken, pickled peaches, and 3 cakes because Mrs. Gable, Mrs. Bell, and Amos had each decided no one else could be trusted with the honor. Caleb led Clara away from the noise for a moment, around the side of the church where the prairie opened wide. "You tired?" he asked. "Yes." "Happy?" She looked at him. The quiet cowboy, who had once stood hatless beneath an auction bell, now stood with sunlight on his face, and hope he no longer tried to hide. "Yes," he said, "but not the easy kind." His tune brushed her wedding ring. "No, the earned kind." He smiled then, fully, and the sight went through her softer than music. That evening they rode home to Hollow Bend in a wagon filled with gifts. Quilts, tools, jars, a new lantern, a Bible from Mrs. Gable, a medical bag Caleb had ordered from Kansas City with brass latches and Clara's initials stamped into the leather. She opened it on the porch and could not speak for a long moment. Caleb grew worried. "Wrong kind." She shook her head. Inside were bandage rolls, scissors, glass bottles, needles, clean linen, and a folded note for the woman who saved more than land. Clara pressed the note to her heart. The house glowed behind them. Supper waited warm. The spring sang beyond the ridge. Cattle lowed in the pasture. Somewhere down the line, a train whistle called through the dusk, but it no longer sounded like leaving. It sounded like the world continuing. Caleb stood beside Clara on the porch, close enough that their shoulders touched. Neither spoke. They did not need to fill every silence. Some silences were empty. Others were full. At last Clara looked over the ranch that had nearly been lost. The land returned not by luck, but by courage. The home built not from rescue, but from respect. "I was so afraid," she said softly, "that being abandoned meant I was unwanted." Caleb took her hand. "Being abandoned means someone failed to stay," he said. "It doesn't mean you weren't worth staying for." The last light slipped across the prairie. Gold on grass, gold on wood, gold on the two of them, standing where shame had ended and chosen love had begun. And at Hollow Bend, where a dying ranch found water, a quiet cowboy found his voice. An abandoned nurse found the home she chose for herself. The wind moved gently through the cottonwoods, like a blessing that had taken years to arrive, but knew exactly where it belonged.